In this lecture we're going to talk about speech acts and context. Take a sentence or an utterance like, "Where are socks?" Is that grammatically okay? Does it make sense to you? Well, we can only really understand what is being said there and whether that's grammatically a good sentence if we understand context. So we can only really understand the meaning of words by understanding the context in which the words are uttered and the larger context of the culture in which an action, that is language, is taking place. We can talk about two kinds of context: context of situation and context of culture. Context of situation is the immediate physical, spatial, temporal, social environment in which verbal exchanges take place. The context of culture is less tangible. It's the historical knowledge, the beliefs, the attitudes, values, shared by members of a community of practice or discourse community, which contribute to the meaning of their verbal exchanges. Here's a text for you to read. I'm just going to let you read this for a few moments, and then I'll ask you a question about it. You may not have finished that, but you can finish that by pausing. But did you understand it? Do you know what it means? As you can see, everything here is grammatical, but is it coherent? Do you understand what it's talking about? So, text can be grammatical, but it can be incoherent. And this text appears to be kind of incoherent until we look at the context of situation. So here's the context of situation. And someone is trying to serenade somebody in one of these apartments on the 4th or 5th floor. And of course this is a little dated. It's before the days of Bluetooth. But now if we put the context of situation together with the text, the linguistic text, then it begins to make a lot more sense. If the balloons popped, the sound would not be able to carry, since everything would be too far away from the correct floor. A closed window would also prevent the sound from carrying, since most buildings tend to be well insulated, etc. So now, looking at the context of situation and relating the text to it, we can begin to understand that this text is actually coherent. Here's another context. I've actually given you the situation at the bottom there, but if you don't look at that and concentrate on the text, and then try to think of the pictures that it creates in your mind. The hollow window in the lonely wall yawned bluish red, full of the early evening sun. Clouds of dust flickered between the crooked remains of the chimneys. The wasteland of rubble was dozing. It's very poetic, and I don't know what pictures you get in your head there. It's a little difficult maybe to make sense of this, but given what this is, a description of a bombed-out building in Berlin at the end of World War II, once you have that particular context of situation to put together with the text, it becomes a lot more clearer, a lot clearer to understand, a lot easier to understand. Here's one more piece of text. Can you make sense of this? A says, "Is that a man and a boy?" B says, "No, it's not. It's a cat and a dog." And you might begin to wonder what is going on here. Is A completely blind? They certainly need their eyes testing. How could anyone mistake a man and a boy for a cat and a dog? It doesn't appear to make any sense at all. It sounds pretty absurd. Well, let's look at the context of the situation that text appears in. Well, it's actually part of a kind of an old but very, very successful text that was used for teaching English in the 30s and 40s and 50s by Eckersley. It was a world bestseller. And as you can see, the text is interested in trying to illustrate particular parts of English grammar rather than communicating any particular sense. Here's one more particular situation. Look at the picture before you read the actual text there. So here's a picture of a guy, and he's holding a card, a sign, and it says in Italian, "Io sono un coglione." Well, in Italian, coglione literally means testicles, but it actually means moron. So what he's holding up a sign there is saying, "I'm a moron," which you would think was kind of be a strange behavior to hold up a sign saying, "I'm a moron," but he's doing that. So what does it mean? Is he really a moron? And why would he do this? Well, if you understand the context of the situation, it begins to make sense. So this is going back several years when Berlusconi was running for election in the Italian elections. So in a speech Tuesday to small business owners, one of his power bases, Berlusconi shocked the nation by referring to those intending to vote for the opposition as coglioni, meaning morons, a vulgarism that roughly translates as morons. Okay, so now perhaps you begin to understand that this particular guy is protesting what Berlusconi is saying. He's kind of saying, well, I'm not going to vote for you. I'm going to vote for the opposition. Therefore, I'm a moron, right? And it encourages other people to make a protest in a similar way. So he's not saying he's a moron. He's saying, I'm voting against Berlusconi. A friend of mine lives in Rome, and this is a kind of real conversation that took place after Berlusconi's remark. So my friend Tim is an American living in Rome, and he lives in a piazza. On the piazza there's a newsstand, and it's run by Mario. He's the owner of the newsstand. And he likes to practice his English with Tim. So the day after Berlusconi said, all people who are going to vote against me are coglioni, or morons, Tim went down to get his newspaper. And Tim says, "Buongiorno, Mario." And then Mario says, because he likes to practice his English, "Good morning, Tim. I am a testicle." And Tim says, "Come," which in Italian means, what? So, how do you begin to understand this, right? You can only begin to understand it according to context. Okay, let's talk a little bit about speech acts. And the important thing about speech acts is that they do things. It may seem strange to talk about speech in action because we often make a distinction. We talk about a person being a person of deeds, not action. And actions speak louder than words. But John Austin, and that's a picture of John Austin there, a linguist, a British linguist, wrote a very short but really quite a brilliant book entitled How to Do Things with Words. And what he argued in this book is that most times when we speak, we actually do things. Things happen. And he coined the phrase speech acts. So speech acts are verbal actions happening in the world. Uttering a speech act, I do something with my words. I perform an activity that at least intentionally brings about a change in the existing state. So if it brings about a change, then it's kind of like an action. one of the types of speech acts he identified was what he called a direct speech act, or his word for it was a performative. And these are particular words. If you utter these words, then something changes. Okay. For example, I baptize you, Ron Weasley, and now you're baptized, Ron Weasley. I named this ship the Titanic. Now it's called the Titanic. I hereby pronounce you husband and wife, and now you are married. You're fired. You've lost your job. I apologize. You're out in baseball, right? There's a nice picture of President Obama taking the oath with Chief Justice Roberts. And what happened when Obama took his first presidential oath? Chief Justice Roberts got the words wrong, so he actually had to do it again later that particular day. The words matter, and what also matters, of course, is whether you have the power to do these things, right? So only a priest really can baptize a baby, and only a kind of a president or queen can name a ship. You can't actually go in the night before and name a ship the Bart Simpson, right? Because you don't have the power to do that. You're not the queen or the president. Okay. For the most part, we don't use performatives that often. We don't use direct speech acts. We use what are called indirect speech acts, or the phrase I'm going to use is a pragmatic act. And I want to give you an example of the pragmatic act of insulting. So this is about the Dixie Chicks, okay? And it's a bit of a story to this particular insult, to understand what counts as an insult. So let's start with a song by Toby Keith called Courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue. And here's one part of the lyric. Justice will be served and the battle will rage. This big dog will fight when you rattle his cage. You'll be sorry that you mess with the US of A, 'cause we'll put a boot in your arse. It's the American way. Great lyric, eh? Anyway, Nancy Maines of the Dixie Chicks was kind of outraged by this particular lyric. And she said, "Don't get me started. I hate it. It's ignorant, and it makes country music sound ignorant. It targets an entire culture, and not just the bad people who did bad things. You've got to have some tact. Anybody can write, 'We'll put a boot in your ass.'" In turn, the writer of that great lyric, Toby Keith, was quoted in December of 2002 as saying, "I'll bury her. She's never written anything that's been a hit." Okay, so the next thing that happens in this particular back and forth is that the Dixie Chicks are playing a concert in London, and she says to the audience, "Just so you know, we're ashamed for the President of the United States is from Texas," because the Dixie Chicks are from Texas too. So once she said this, then Toby Keith retaliated by showing on big screens behind the stage the doctored photo of Maines and Saddam Hussein. This is around about the time of the invasion of Iraq. And of course this was an attack on Maines. Okay. She's getting a big hug from Saddam. Okay, so now the final act in this story is there's the AMC Awards, and Natalie Maines appears wearing a t-shirt that says FUTK, right? Now, if you're thinking that this is an insult, then you would be correct, and you can imagine what the insult actually says, right? Fuck you, Toby Keith, right? But of course, that's not really the official explanation of FUTK. According to a Dixie Chicks representative, it's my understanding that according to chatter on the website, Natalie's t-shirt stands for freedom, understanding, truth, and knowledge. Of course, Okay, so what we have is a pragmatic act of insulting. F-U-T-K is an insult directed against Toby Keith. Only the context and understanding the context will allow us to understand that this is a particular insult. Most of the times, our language we use in particular contexts where the situation and the situational context and the context of culture help us understand what is being said. So, we talk about coherence. I mentioned coherence before. And so even though a text might be grammatically correct, it might be incoherent if we don't have the required background knowledge. See if you can understand this text, right? He's looking at his watch. He's going to blow. Wednesday are through. I've given you a clue there, right, in the graphic. But that's perfectly understandable to me because I have the background knowledge to know that Wednesday there is referring to an actual football club called Sheffield Wednesday. They were actually named Sheffield Wednesday because the club met every week on a Wednesday and they were saying, well, what should we call it? It's going to be Sheffield something, but okay, let's call it Wednesday because we meet on a Wednesday. That's how they got their name. So he's looking at his watch. I know it's quite obviously the referee. Okay, that's what they do at the end, towards the end of a game. And once they look at their watch and they know it's full time, they signal the end of full time by blowing their whistle. And Wednesday are through. Through might be a little difficult here, but it's what it means is it's a cup match, and they're through to the next round. The cup is a knockout competition, and so they're going through to the next round of the competition. You might look at that other phrase there. Mary heard the ice cream man coming down the street. She remembered her birthday money and rushed into the house. Now, there are different ways you can understand the coherence of this. I mean, for most people, they would say, oh, okay, she went home into her house to get her birthday money because she wanted to buy an ice cream. It could also be interpreted that, who knows, maybe she's frightened that the ice cream man is going to steal her money and she's going to hide it. But what makes it coherent, of course, is our background knowledge or cultural knowledge of this particular situation. So the notion of coherence is not given in the speaker's utterances. It's created in the minds of the speakers and hearers by the inferences they make based on the words they hear. Here's a few more pieces of language, and notice how only by understanding the context do we actually understand what is being said here. So, a pair of pants and 2 shirts. Wednesday, okay? Notice how that is so reduced because it's a typical exchange in a dry cleaners. You don't have to say, excuse me, I have a pair of pants and 2 shirts here. I would like them cleaned. Because it's obvious that this is the nature of the situation, the context that you bring in clothes to be dry cleaned. So now look at that wear socks. Now, of course, if you look at B, you'll get the clue that we're in a department store. I don't work here. Okay? So knowing it's in a department store, it's quite clearly grammatical. If you said that when you were at home looking for a pair of socks, wear socks, it would be considered ungrammatical. But here, of course, it's not, because it's in a department store. And we can look at other situations. Good morning. We usually get a greeting back of good morning, but obviously something's wrong with this person when they say what's good about it. And notice how we can switch the particular meaning here. Are you doing anything tonight? Which sometimes is a pre-invitation. The other person says, yes, I have a quiz tomorrow. So maybe you withdraw the invitation. Oh dear, good luck. So particular contexts, language has to be placed in a context to make it understandable. Here's one other one, and notice how the context changes here and the meaning changes. So here's an exchange. A says, want to play baseball? and B says, "You're younger than me." Okay? Now, think of two contexts here. The first context is A is younger, and B is the younger brother, maybe 7 or so, and B is the older brother at 12. So the younger brother says, "Want to play baseball?" to his older brother, and the older brother says, "You're younger than me." What do you understand by the word younger here? Probably you'll get a sense of being inexperienced, raw, not as expert as the older brother. And you'll also get a meaning here that B is a refusal, and that's what we call an implicature. It's an inference from the response. Now look at the second context, right? A is the child, and B is the father. So the child says to the father, "Want to play baseball?" And the father responds, "You're younger than me." What does young mean now? It doesn't mean inexperienced, raw. It means more energetic compared with the aging father. Notice the implicature or inference is still the same. It's still a refusal. But the meaning of those words is different based upon the context or the social relationships between the two speakers. Okay, so now let's see if we can try to understand the kinds of verbal exchanges, the kinds of speech acts which happen in the context of soccer. And before we do that, let us just underline the fact that language use is a cultural act, not only because it reflects the ways in which one individual acts on another individual through such speech acts as thanking, greeting, complimenting, that are variously accomplished in various cultures. Language use is a cultural act also because its users co-construct the very social roles that define them as members of a discourse community. So the older brother is defining the relationship between himself and the younger brother by saying, "You're not as experienced, you're not as good as me, how can I play baseball with you?" And at the same time, the father is also co-constructing with the younger, with their child, the relationship of, you're far more energetic than I am. I'm too tired to be able to play baseball. Okay, so let's look at this notion then of co-constructing the roles we play in the context of football chants. Okay, and you could say this is some kind of communication, interpersonal, collective communication, because these are chants chanted by large numbers of people in a stadium. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. These are pretty old ones, but you'll get the notion, right? The concept is, so A here is one set of fans. They're actually Arsenal fans. And B is the opposing fans, right? So this was a chant Arsenal fans had for a particular player called Charlie George, who played in the 70s and 80s. And the Arsenal fans used to shout, chant, "Charlie George, superstar, how many goals have you scored so far?" And then the opposing fans would chant back, "Charlie George, superstar, walks like a woman and he wears a bra." Notice the typical insults comparing the male to a female. But you get the idea here that they're co-constructing their particular roles as antagonists. And here's another one. This is a Manchester City chant, a player they used to have called Summerby. So A here would be Manchester City fans, and B most likely Manchester United fans, right? So sha-la-la-la Summerby, and then the opposing fans shout, "Who the fucking hell is he?" And then the City fans would chant back, "The greatest footballer in history." So this is kind of verbal behavior that's happening all the time in soccer stadiums. The chant is a very interesting source of verbal behavior, and it can only be understood as a speech act, and it can only be understood in terms of the context of situation of a stadium, football stadium, and the cultural knowledge of who these particular players are and the cultural relationships between the two rival sets of fans. Here's an example, and this is taken from two lower division teams in England, in the England Football League. These are two teams called Scunthorpe and Grimsby, and these are in a county of England, which is in the Midlands, called Lincolnshire. And as you can see, Grimsby is on the coast there, famous for its fishing, and then Scunthorpe is a little further inland. And you can read the article from which this particular chant is taken. The article is a great discussion of the meaning of chants. And so these are the Scunthorpe fans chanting and against the Grimsby fans, right? So if I had the wings of an eagle, if I had the arse of a cow, that's kind of a British spelling of arse, I'd fly over Blundell Park, Grimsby, and shit on the bastards below. Shit on the bastards below. And you know, this is kind of the kind of chants that you're very familiar with between rival sets of fans. And they're denigrating the other. Let's take it now to this denigration of the other to a further extreme, where that denigration involves racist chanting. Okay, and on the surface of it, this can be understood as racist chanting. But looking at the context of situation, the context of culture, I'll just put out the question there, is it really racist? And this is part of a huge discussion that's been going on in English soccer for many years now, and it still really hasn't been resolved. So let me explain what's going on here. There is a group of Tottenham Hotspur fans which call themselves the Yid Army, okay, and they wear kind of hoodies, as you can see there, right, with the insignia Yid Army, right, and it's a group of ultra fans, and they call themselves the Yid Army, and they chant Yid Army, Yid Army, Yid Army. Now, Yid, of course, is a highly, highly offensive term to refer to a Jew in British English. So why are they calling themselves the Yid Army? Well, this is a particular story that goes back many years. Tottenham is in a part of London which has quite a large Jewish community, and rival fans would taunt Spurs fans by calling them Jews or Yids, right? Being a highly offensive racist term. And these particular rival fans were most often Arsenal, because Arsenal and Tottenham are in the same part of London, are North London, and the Arsenal fans would use the term Yid, or anti-Jewish slogans, to taunt the particular Spurs fans. As often happens in these situations, the actual word, the offensive word, was recouped and turned against those who were using it. So the Spurs fans took the word Yid and used it as the name of their particular fans. So they embraced the term and turned it against those who are using it to denigrate them. And this is often the case with lots of words that can be diffused by accepting the term and then using it against them, others. Okay. But so this starts off a set of behavior every time Spurs and Arsenal play, there's these chants that go back and forth, right? So the fans might shout the name of their particular group, and then our Arsenal fans would use racist chants like these. Spurs are on their way to Belsen. Hitler's going to gas them again. Pretty awful stuff. Highly anti-Semitic, the references, right? But the question is it really anti-Semitic, or is it just the behavior of denigration used by one fan group against another fan group? The picture there, by the way, is a picture of Ajax Football Club, and the same thing has happened with Ajax, that they have been branded the Jewish club, even though, you know, small numbers of Jews live in Amsterdam, and so their particular flag there, which has got the Star of David and resembles the Israeli flag, is being used as a representation of fan support for Ajax. But it has really nothing to do with Jews or Israel. It's just the adoption of a particular name, and then you get this kind of behavior between the two fans. It's a kind of theatre. But, of course, it has serious consequences, as you can see, by the use of these racist chants. A way of understanding this behavior has been given to by Bakhtin, a Russian linguist, who's called it Carnivalesque behavior, like people who are in a carnival. And if you think of the carnival that happens in Athens, it's not really at carnival time, but carnivalesque behavior is what happens at Halloween. People dress up in outrageous costumes and do outrageous things for one day. So what is it? It takes the form of ritual spectacles, verbal compositions, and curses, oaths. It's excessive, in bad taste, offensive, and degrading. That's exactly what those chants are, right? It's carnivalesque. A carnivalesque world is a world constructed outside officialdom and perhaps more significantly without rank or social hierarchy. So all the fens are fens. Okay, they abandon whatever jobs they have outside of the stadium. In the stadium, they're just fans chanting these really offensive things. The meaning of denigration is often less concerned with the content of what is being said, and the content there, of course, was anti-Semitic, highly anti-Semitic. So it's less to do with the content of what is being said, but with the act of renegotiating the identity of the other. Okay? So the Arsenal fans are renegotiating the identity of the Spurs fans as being Jews, and then associating with that all the kind of anti-Semitic kinds of chants and words that are used in the larger society. Okay, so let's just finish with a quote from Fever Pitch. And Nick Hornby's a teenager at this particular time he's writing this, right? Teenager in his early 20s. It's a game against Coventry. And Tommy Hutchinson, who was a great player, scores a fantastic goal for Coventry. On the North Bank, and that's where the main ultra Arsenal fans are standing. On the North Bank, there was a split second of silence as we watched the Coventry fans cavorting around at the clock end, like dolphins. And then came the fierce, unanimous, and heartfelt chant. You're going to get your fucking heads kicked in. What is that? That's a speech act. It's an incitement to violence. Clearly. Right? But is it? Or is it just the ritualized speech act relationship between rival fans? If somebody really got hurt then, which they probably well did, could we blame Nick Hornby? Could we say, you instigated this violence? So that's the question. That's the question with the racist chanting. Is it racist or is it just theatre? And so if you have a look at some of the readings in the about this, that's the question that you need to answer. So understanding language as a speech act can only happen in context.